Hi there, welcome everyone to another session in our Computational Fluency series for grades 6 to 9. This is part of the School District 38 Numeracy series of burst sessions available as recordings on our District Numeracy playlist on our YouTube channel. I'm going to turn over the session to Shaheen Musani. Thank you for joining us.
So today we're going to talk about computational fluency and in particular focus on forms of assessment in 6 to 9. So let's remind ourselves of what computational fluency is. Computational fluency is having efficient and accurate methods for computing. It is also our ability to be flexible in our methods and be able to apply various strategies in different contexts. It is also our ability to connect with some of our understandings of number to how we will compute with numbers. Why grow computational fluency in our classrooms? Well, computational fluency encourages students to develop conceptual understanding. They build procedural fluency, mathematical agency, flexibility, strong sense of number, problem-solving skills, and confidence, and more. When we are engaging in the learning, think specifically about your own context and your practice. What criteria do you use to assess progress in mathematics learning? Think about the big ideas that you're teaching and the specific learning standards that you're addressing. When do you collect evidence of learning in mathematics? In the big ideas and learning standards, how do you collect evidence of learning in mathematics in general, right? And how do you document evidence of student learning in mathematics? In today's session, we're going to look specifically at using proficiency indicators to assess and report. We'll begin by looking at how we can connect computational fluency to learning standards. We'll think about how we can use proficiency indicators to assess learning standards and the big idea in mathematics. And we'll look at how we can record evidence of learning and using evidence of learning to report. So this image is a visual of all of the pieces of our curriculum and how they connect to one another. What is important to think about are how these elements work independently and how we might address them in our math classes. When we are concentrating on building practice around mathematical curricular competencies, we are encouraging students to build understanding of key concepts and ideas and topics. And in the end, we are trying to connect them to some bigger understanding or bigger skills in mathematics. When we are assessing, we are looking at involving students as partners in the assessment relationship, and they can be involved in doing some self-assessment, peer assessment, and then we can also be providing feedback along the way in various contexts of learning. In addition to that, we could be encouraging students to think about how some of the things that we're doing in math are connected to our core competencies and inviting them to self-assess. So computational fluency is one of the big ideas in mathematics. There are many skills associated with building computational fluency. And when we are teaching mathematics in a year, we want to grow computational fluency over time and apply it to many topics. And so it's helpful to think about what it is that we're hoping students are going to be demonstrating as they're growing their skills. So this particular page looks at how we might support students in setting goals in mathematics around computational fluency. It's about helping them understand what it is and what they should be demonstrating. So in computational fluency, we're going to support students with choosing the most suitable math strategy from a set of strategies and explaining why they selected this strategy that's most effective. They'll be explaining connections between possible strategies. They're also going to look at sharing understandings in words and other representations, especially when they're practicing using math language. We want to also determine whether accurate solutions are identified. And we want students to build some flexibility in using various strategies so that they're self-selecting which strategy could be most efficient and effective in a given situation, especially when it's solving problems in daily contexts. So let's dig into the curriculum a little bit more. When we look at and examine the big ideas, which are at the top of your screen from grade 6 to 9, computational fluency is shown as a connection to operations with whole numbers and decimals, with integers and decimals, with operations with fractions, and operations with rational numbers. So it is important to think about what curricular competencies might support growth and development in understanding of those topics while building those skills. And so we encourage students to practice their ability to reason, estimately, to use mental math strategies, to visualize, to communicate and represent in different ways, to explain and justify using math vocabulary that is relevant and that will further understanding, and to also connect the ideas that are being learned to other math concepts. How may we grow our understanding of mathematics curricular competencies? Before we begin to assess, what we want to do is think specifically about what do these competencies mean? So these are some supporting documents that we are going to have available on the portal in our new RichNet, where we explain what students could be demonstrating as they are engaging in this particular skill or process or strategy. When it comes to computational fluency, we're looking at their ability to estimate. And so this document kind of shares what is going to be expected of them when they're doing that. And really, it's looking at how they can be using different estimation strategies, and that they can use their estimation to help them reason final solutions that they determine using computational strategies. We can also support them with understanding what communicating in their mathematical thinking in many ways means and how they might represent that thinking. We're hoping that we were going to see students use math language and vocabulary in their discourse with peers and in large group settings or on paper when they're writing. We want to see them being able to use materials and to draw what they are thinking as part of the process of determining solutions. And we also want them to be able to incorporate any feedback that we or peers give them to improve their communication skills. When we also think about computational fluency, we're encouraging students to continue to explain and justify their mathematical thinking in all sorts of tasks that we are doing in the classroom in mathematics, whether it be through instructional routines or if they're in math stations. We want students to be able to understand what the difference between explaining and justifying is. Particularly when it comes to being able to think about whether their solution makes sense and being able to share sort of a process that they came to, that they use to come to a solution, and then thinking about the context and determining if it's reasonable or not. So having some understanding about some of those key curricular competencies allows us to be able to build some assessment tools that we can use over and over again in the classroom. There are different ways to go about doing this, but what we have to start with is an understanding of our BC proficiency scale. This scale indicates a learning continuum that is both based in knowledge and skills. When we look at the language that's highlighted on the screen, at an emerging level, students are showing an initial understanding of concepts and competencies and developing a partial understanding of concepts and competencies. at a proficient level, a complete understanding of concepts and competencies, and an extending level, a sophisticated understanding of the concepts and competencies. But what we're working towards, and our goal is towards proficiency, where we're seeing students work independently and showing consistent understanding and use of strategies and processes. So one way, this is just one strategy that we might use for constructing proficiency indicators for some of these learning standards. And the learning standards, remember, are both curricular competencies as well as content. In math, sometimes it might be helpful to start with the content. We know what we're going to teach in terms of the topic. If we know that, then we can start to figure out, okay, which competencies will students practice most when they're engaging in the learning of this particular content, right? And then once we know that, we can start to think about what those competencies actually look like, right? We go back to some of those definitions and ideas that I shared in the previous slides, and then think about how those indicators might be useful to you when you're teaching and when you're assessing students so that you can report effectively. And then in the end, sometimes it's helpful to share tools with students. And when we're doing that, we want to think about what language might be most helpful for them in understanding these learning standards. So let's take a look at an example. So if we want to focus on building computational fluency skills, these are the particular curricular competencies that we are going to practice on the left-hand side. And as we're practicing them, we're going to learn this particular content on the right-hand side in grade 6, which is multiplication and division of decimals. So we want to think about what kind of tool is going to be most effective for you in terms of being able to assess students' knowledge and skills. So sometimes when we start to think about what proficiency looks like, we want to build some indicators or criteria. And this particular slide shares some thinking prompts that might be helpful in doing that, where we're considering some questions here for how you might think about the competencies and how you might think about content, and then what you might consider if you want to see how these two are connected and or enabling one another to grow. And so once you have kind of an understanding of what the expectations are for students at a proficient level at this particular grade, you can start to write your proficiency indicators. In math, I find it most helpful to include both the competencies and the content in proficiency descriptors. For example, when we are looking at grade 6 curriculum and focusing on multiplication and division of decimals, where what is highlighted in blue on your screen are the curricular competencies, but everything in black is speaking specifically about what we're expecting students to show at a proficient level with their practice and also with their content knowledge. And so we could be using this again in grade 6, but then also in grade 7 as students practice using working with decimals with all operations, right? And it also gives us a starting point to think about how we might create a lesson sequence for instruction. We're going to start to think about how we would build in some opportunity for practice around estimation, using some of the strategies that are outlined there. We're going to encourage students to always be explaining and justifying, and then show them many strategies for computation. In addition to that, we are going to provide them with opportunity to solve problems in any given context, and then check for the reasonableness of their solutions, right? And so this is something that we want to work through over a year's time. It doesn't necessarily have to be in a unit, one lesson after the other. So once we have proficiency indicators, one option for building an assessment tool is to stop right there and to create something called a single point rubric, where we list the proficiency indicators on the left-hand side and use that as a gauge when we're assessing student understanding and evidence of learning. So this is only one example of what a template of a single point rubric could look like. It has a checkbox after each of the criteria for you to put a indicator for progress for a student. As you are working through and building understanding and practice on this particular topic. So you would provide some feedback for students. And then what I like about this tool is it puts it back into the student's hand to think about, okay, if this is my feedback from my teacher, what am I going to do next time that I'm practicing this sort of thing in math? Now, if you want to build out a whole proficiency scale, you might look to some of these thinking prompts to support you in developing the criteria for the other levels of the learning continuum. And think really deeply about what students should be showing or could be showing. What is important to think about with the bookends of our proficiency scale, the extending and the emerging, is that they are so broad. We might be able to see so many different things that students are demonstrating that it could be helpful to know your students before developing this particular tool, because you can write in the specific things that you know that they would be demonstrating. And so that the tool becomes quite personalized for them. And so when you have developed a entire proficiency scale, it could look like this. And again, we're not saying that this is something that you would use day to day, but over a period of time. And it gives us some direction in the proficiency level to think about what are my next steps in teaching. These are some examples of proficiency indicators for the computational fluency concepts in other grades. In grade 7, students will be working with operations with integers. On the screen here, we see a different color, green, to represent some of the thinking that might also be associated with this learning. And so we want to just make note that in this particular context, although this is something that we would teach in sequence when we're doing some learning around integers, the green part really is to do with number sense, because it's talking about relationship with number. These proficiency indicators are for fractions in grade 8 when we're performing operations with fractions. That's addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. And students are also going to be working with order of operations, but no exponents. There's brackets involved, but no exponents until grade 9. In grade 9, we'll see operations with rational numbers. This is where we start to be able to move fluidly from different forms of representation of numbers, such as fractions and then decimals, and being able to compare them, order them, but also say which one is bigger or smaller. But in addition to that, we need to be able to work with positive values and negative values when we're adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. And so this tool can be used on its own, or we can start to develop the entire proficiency scale with it. So once you have a tool like that, how do we use them to assess the learning standards in math? We are going to be able to think about this on sort of a broader scale. Once you have proficiency indicators, that's sort of the plan mode, right? We've determined kind of what our indicators for proficiency are. So that's going to help us determine the sequence of learning in our instruction. And then also gets us to really think about where would be pertinent opportunities for us to collect evidence of learning around these particular points on the scale. And then also can inform how we will report on a written learning update or when we're having a conference with families. So when we are gathering evidence of learning, it's really important to think about when and where you can collect evidence of learning. We can collect evidence of learning through products, tasks that students complete, where there is something in hand or to look at, things like projects, assignments, tests, quizzes, notebooks, things like that. But what is really important is that we pay particular attention to the bottom two pieces. The conversations that we are having with individual students when we're working with them independently or when we have them in small groups. And also when they're asking questions, it could also be during your observations when you are engaging in number talks or in other instructional routines, when they are doing math stations, when they're engaging in discourse in pairs, lots of opportunities in which we could be watching what students are doing and listening for what students are saying in relation to the math learning standards at hand. So this is a tool that you could then build to record your evidence of learning once you've got it. I typically would print one per student, and I would simply highlight their progress on each thing that I have witnessed, usually more than once, and build this kind of completion over time. So a completed one is going to happen over a little bit of time. Remember that we want to try to engage in learning about decimals over the entire year. So in the beginning, in term one, we might start to look at those number concepts. We might then start to build in some computational and mental math strategies, and then we start to apply it to real world situations and do more numeracy tasks with them. And so as we're doing that, we are starting to highlight aspects of the whole tool, and this could be something that comes up. And so this is a fictitious student, Rachel, where we're noticing here that she's looking at, she can proficiently work with multiplication in many strategies for computation and mental math, but we want to encourage her to do so also with division. And we will provide more opportunity for her to work on some estimation strategies as well. So that's kind of giving us a picture of where Rachel's understanding is about the concept of decimals and multiplying and dividing, but it also gives us some indication of where she is in terms of building her skills. So how could we record this? You could leave that as is and put it in your binder along with all the other students' pages, or we could create some record-keeping tools. And people like to do this in different ways. The one on the right-hand side is more just the curricular competency based. And so at the bottom of the tool, you would write which like assignment or task that students are doing, that where you were able to view some of those competencies happening, and then you would write a proficiency indicator at the top in which you saw that happen. The assessment tool on the left is more versatile, used for both knowledge and skills. And at the bottom, you will see particular indicators, A through F. And what I would do is just record in the chart what actual tasks or observations or conversations I'm having, where those are being practiced. So an example of that would be this. Is, when I did the clothesline discussion related to decimals, and we were talking about the relationship with decimals and fractions on February the 13th, it was looking at estimation as well as watching students explain and justify their thinking. In addition to that, they also had to represent their thinking in concrete, pictorial, and symbolic ways. So that's just showing me the things that I'm doing to target some of these learning standards. And then on the right-hand side, I would list my student's name, create a roster, and then have where those students, where those tasks are and their progress on each of those tasks. So using evidence of learning to provide feedback and to report. So once you have developed a tool like this, and we've used it to assess consistently throughout the year or the term, and I have some understanding where the student is overall, I know that with division, I want to support the student with moving her learning forward. So I want to think about what next steps to provide. I also want to think about if she's, proficient with her multiplication strategies, what it is I could be encouraging her to do so that she can move towards the extending level. And when you are providing feedback, you can be doing that independently. But when we're thinking about a overall report or a learning update, we want to highlight what is most important. And so this is an example of feedback that you might provide. What is listed in green is what the student can do, and what is shown in orange is an example of her next steps. So this term, we've been working on practicing a variety of strategies for multiplying and dividing decimals. Rachel has shown confidence when using materials and visual organizers when sharing her process for determining answers to multiplication questions. These might include area models, grid paper, and base 10 blocks when sharing her progress or her process. She can also select an appropriate strategy to use in real-life situations and problems. Rachel is encouraged to use similar strategies when dividing decimals, as she mostly relies on using traditional symbolic methods. So that's an example of how we would provide targeted feedback that provides actionable next steps for the student. So where can you find these resources? We're going to be putting some of these things onto our portal, and then they will be uploaded to our new platform for connection, which is going to be RichNet. So you can look for that in the next couple of weeks. You can also look under the numeracy foundation tiles under computational fluency. There is an assessment tile at the bottom where you will find helpful tools for what you might assess for computational fluency in grade 6 to 7. And then also an assessment sort of tool guide that will support you with looking at computational fluency in over the year. Thank you.